Previously, we looked at assigning one job to one group. But what if you have a particular team that is going to handle multiple jobs? How do you decide what order to do those jobs in? Well, sequencing is when we prioritize jobs that have been assigned to a resource. And there are different methods for sequencing. So for example, we could have the jobs come in and do them first come, first serve. So if we're building houses, we start on the first house. When the client comes in, the first client, we build their house first. And then the second client who comes in, we build their house next. So we could do it first come, first serve. But that's not the only order you could put the jobs into. We could do them based on due date. So maybe each of our clients has a different move-in date they need, and so we could schedule the tasks so that we start the house that has to be done first. Based on the move-in date, we do it first. We could also look at the amount of slack we have. So we could compare the due date and how long it takes and just see how much flexibility we have, how much of a buffer is there. And we could do the jobs that have the least amount of slack. Those where it's tight and really we need to get started because as soon as they're done, they're due. Their processing time and due date are basically aligned. And then we leave for last the jobs where there's a bit more buffer, right? Because we could do them and then there's some extra time between the time to do it and when it was actually due. We have a bit of slack. Or we could put the jobs in order based on shortest processing time. So think about your to-do list. We like to have things checked off our to-do list, so we do the easy jobs first. There are other methods like last come, first serve. Maybe you have preferred customer status. There are other methods you could use, but we're going to look right now at first come, first serve, due date, slack, and shortest processing time. So what we do is we need to figure out which one is best for our company. And different companies will have different needs, so they'll get a different answer as to which method they should use for sequencing the jobs. But let's look at how a company would decide which prioritization method they should institute. All right, so we have team number 5, and team number 5 has a number of projects they are working on. Okay. What we have here is how long it takes for them to work on each project and when they are due. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this information and we're going to use it to load up as if we were using a particular sequencing method, and then we'll see how effective that sequencing method is. And the comparison between methods will allow us to choose our future prioritization method. So let's dig in. So let's start with first come, first serve. Now, anytime you are looking at your sequencing, first thing you want to do is you want to load in the tasks. So in this case, because they're first come, first serve, we will do A, then B, then C, then D, then E. After we put in that sequence, the next thing we load is going to be processing time and due date, because those are the two pieces we already have. And then we can fill in the rest of the table after that. So we find that activity A has a processing time of 3, and in this example this is 3 days, and it's due on the 10th. Activity B takes 10 days, due on the 12th. C takes 2 days, due on the 25th. D takes 4 days, due on the 8th. And E takes 5 days and is due on the 15th. Once you've put in the processing time and the due date, you can start loading up as if you were going to run through this sequence. So we would start the clock at 0, and task A takes 3 days, so we're done on day 3. It's due on day 10, so we're not tardy. That means the earliest we can start B is the second we're done with A, so we can start B at day 3. It takes 10 days to do. We're done on the 13th. Problem is it was due on the 12th, so we're tardy by 1 day. The earliest we can start activity C is essentially the second we're done with B. So that would be on day 13. It takes 2 days to do it, so we're done on the 15th. It's due on the 25th, and so we're not tardy. We start D on the 15th. It takes 4 days to do it. We're done on the 19th. Well, it was due on the 8th, so we are tardy, and we're tardy by 11 days. We start E on the 19th. It takes 5 days to do it. We're done on the 24th. It was due on the 15th, so we're 9 days late. Now we want to be able to compare the FirstCome FirstServe sequencing method to others to find out which prioritization method is best. So we want to keep track of number of activities that are tardy, the average tardiness that we're experiencing, and the average completion time. So if we add up 3 plus 13 plus 15 plus 19 plus 24, we find the average completion time is 14.8. If we average the tardiness, so we have 2 where there is no tardy, so make sure you count those as 0. And we take 0 plus 1 plus 0 plus 11 plus 9 and divide that by 5, we get 4.2. Okay? We'll hang on to that information and we'll compare it to our other sequencing methods in a moment. But let's look at another method. Let's look at due date, and some books call it EDD, or earliest due date. And here we're going to do the jobs based on when they are due. So if we refer back to that information from that original table, we see, for example, that activity D is due on the 8th, and activity A is due on the 10th. And we can put them in order based on due date. So B is due on the 12th, E is due on the 15th, and C is due on the 25th. So now we're in order by due date. Well, now we have to fill in the processing times that go with those activities. So we pull that information from the original table. So D had a processing time of 4, A of 3, B of 10, E of 5, and C of 2. Now, we want to see how effective this method is, so we start the timer at 0. And if we started at 0, it takes 4 days to do D, so the earliest D can be done is day 4, which is not tardy. A, the earliest it can start, is 4, takes 3 days to do it, so done at day 7, not tardy. B starts on day 7, takes 10 days to do it, done on day 17. It was due on day 12, so we're 5 days late. E starts on the 17th, takes 5 days to do, is done on the 22nd, and it was due on the 15th, which means it's late by 7 days. C, the earliest we can start is 22, takes 2 days to do it, done on the 24th. It was due on the 25th, so we're not tardy. So here we have 2 activities that are late compared to the previous method, which had 3. And we can find the average tardiness, so 0 plus 0 plus 5 plus 7 plus 0, divide by 5, and we get 2.4. The completion time, we can find the average for that, so 4 plus 7 plus 17 plus 22 plus 24 divided by 5, and we get 14.8. So let's look at the 2 other methods and then we will compare them all together. So let's look at the one called slack. So slack can be calculated as the due date minus today's date minus processing time. So we're trying to make a decision for the future of our company. How are we going to sequence these jobs in the future. And so let's suppose that today is day 4. Okay, and we're going to look at how many jobs are already behind. And then if we take into consideration how long they take versus when they're due, is there any wiggle room in any of these activities? So the first thing to do is calculate the level of slack for all of the activities. So let's just go back, if we can, to this slide here and calculate slack. Now remember, slack is going to be our due date. So for activity 10, or activity A, it's 10. And we need to subtract today. So if we're working on activity A, we really have 6 days left until it's due. And it's going to take 3 days to do it. So 10 minus 4 minus 3, and we find that we have 3 days slack. 3 days wiggle room between when we need to absolutely start activity A and when it's due. Activity B is due on the 12th. Today is the 4th, and we're going to subtract 10 days because it takes 10 days to do it. And when we do that, we find we're already 2 days behind. For C, it's due on the 25th. Today is the 4th. We subtract the 2nd. So 25 minus 4, we got 21 minus 2. Looks like we have lots of slack for activity C. We have 19 days before we actually have to get started on that project in order to meet the due date. All right, for D, it's 8 minus 4 minus 4. So really here, there's no slack at all. For E, the due date minus today's date minus the processing time. So 15 minus 4 minus 5, and we get 6. So really C and E are the ones that have C, E, and A have slack. D has no slack, and B we're already behind on. So let's go back to the table and let's put that information in. So we're going to do it based on least amount of slack to the most. So when we look at this, what we see is that we're already behind on activity B, right? It had -2 slack. It was due on the 12th, and it takes 10 days to do it. And because it's already the 4th day in the process, we're already behind. Then the one that had 0 slack was D, and it had a due date of the 8th, and it had processing time of 4 days. Then we had A, and A had 3 days worth of slack, and A was due on the 10th, and the processing time was 3 days. Then we had E, and E had 6 days of slack. It was due on the 15th, and it takes 5 days to do it. And that leaves C, which had 19 days of slack, was due on the 25th, and took 2 days to process. So now that we've organized based on the sequence, and we've loaded our processing time and due dates, we can now load this table and compare it to the others. Well, if you want to truly be able to compare this scenario to the others, you're going to have the same starting time. Now I know you're saying it's day 4, so why would I start the clock at 0? And that's because this is to help us make a decision about how we process, what order we process future projects in. Okay, so we're going to start the timer at 0, and then B would take 10 days to do, so we would be due on the 10th. It'd be due on the 12th, so we would not be tardy if we started at day 0. Okay, and we're doing it because it has the least amount of slack. That means that activity D starts on day 10. It takes 4 days to do, so we're done on the 14th. It's due on the 8th, so we're behind by 6 days. A Starts on the 14th, takes 3 days to do. Done on the 17th, due on the 10th, so we're behind 7 days. We start E on the 17th, it takes 5 days to do. We're done on the 22nd. It was due on the 15th, so we're 7 days behind. C, we'd start on the 22nd, takes 2 days to do. We're done on the 24th, it's due on the 25th, so it's not tardy. So notice this sequencing method has 3 activities that are going to be late, and we can find the average tardiness and the average completion time. So the average tardiness here is 4, and the average completion time is 17.4. So add up the 5 numbers, divide by 5. Sometimes slack is referred to as minimum slack time, or MST, so you could see that maybe in the textbook as well. Now let's look at the last scenario and then we'll compare. So SPT is shortest processing time. So this is the one where we pick the activities that take the least amount of time and check them off the to-do list first. So when we look at our processing time, C took 2 days, so we'll do it first. A took 3 days. D took 4. E took 5. And B took 10. Now we need to load in the due dates that go with those. So C was due on the 25th. And A was due on the 10th. And D was due on the 8th, E was due on the 15th, and B on the 12th. Now, because we want to compare them, we got to load her up. So start at 0, takes 2 days, so we're done on day 2. Start A on day 2, it's done on day 5. C and A are both done before their due dates, so 0 tardiness. We start D on day 5, takes 4 days, we're done on day 9, it's 1 day late. We start E on day 9, it's done by the 14th, it's due on the 15th, not late. We start B on the 14th, takes 10 days to do it, we're done on the 24th, it's late, and it's 12 days late. So here we have 2 activities that are tardy. Average tardiness is 2.6. Average completion time is 10.8. So let's compare these different methods and figure out which one is the best method for our company. So let's summarize. We had first come, first serve. We had due date. We had slack, we had shortest processing time. When we look at the average completion time for first come, first serve, it was 14.8. It had an average tardiness of 4.2, and it had 3 jobs that were tardy. If we go back and look, we can see that the most tardy activity was 11 days. The due date had an average completion time of 14.8. The average tardiness was 2.4, so better than the first come, first serve. It also had less number of jobs that were tardy. And the maximum tardiness was not as severe as the first come, first serve. Well, how does this compare to slack? Slack had an average completion time of 17.4. The average tardiness was 4. 3 jobs were tardy, and the maximum tardiness was 7. Shortest processing time had the lowest completion time, 10.8. Its average tardiness was 2.6. The number of jobs that were tardy were 2, and the maximum tardiness was 11. So as we look at these different methods, we have to decide which prioritization method is better for our company. So notice that shortest processing time had the lowest completion time. So all jobs on average were done earlier. The one with the lowest average tardiness was the due date. The one that had the least jobs that were tardy was due date and shortest processing time. The one that had the least amount for the maximum tardiness was due date and slack. So you'll notice there's no clear winner that wins in all 4 categories, and this will always be the case. Almost always will be the case. So you have to think about the priorities for your company. Now, based on the table we see here, which would be the best method? Probably due date, because it wins 3 out of the 4 metrics. Now, it's possible for your company, though, you may have one metric that weighs more heavily than others because of the responses. So, for example, maximum tardiness may become the biggest priority if being severely late on one activity has huge repercussions. If we can get by with being a little late on everything and not having a maximum tardiness that's really large, then that might be the better route. So it depends on what the repercussions are of having jobs not finished on time and how long it takes to complete them. So without clear emphasis on a particular metric, we would go with which one wins the most. And in this case, we have due date as the best approach. So then for our company, going forward, we're going to prioritize additional houses that come in, or clients that come in looking for houses, based on when they need them by. So we'll do the ones that are due first.